there's much to say about the human condition. I think all my work explores it in ways of questions, of writing, of expression, music, art, words. I think we all find ourselves sort of like in the middle of everything all at once. And I think that's the beauty of the human condition. I am here today and I'm here to present my thoughts and my ideas around identity and the accumulation of it. I think the first question is why? Why are we talking about identity and why does it matter? I think at the very fundamental and very core level of the building blocks that make up society is the idea of a unit, an atom, the self. We are just one part of a large breathing or organism that takes on its personality and its own movements and attributes from what then happens in the binding and the collective molecule, organ, tissue, expansion. We become because we allow ourselves to change with every single multiplicity that occurs in, around, to, above, below us. And to examine the self is to be able to see how better then you can contribute, or not even contribute because it sounds so productive, but to realize, to discover, to find out how your muscles work in favor of the collective movement, the collective dance, the trance, the movement, the realization, and I guess like altogether a change in the world. Something that emphasizes multiple areas of convergence and divergence, and I guess some sort of equilibrium. When we are blessed enough to find it, it always suffices. My name is Tandega Malaza, and I am a thinker, a writer, a communicator, a conversationalist, and a creator. I examine the things around me through different art forms. Recently, I have started painting. I have found it to be very meditative, and I just hope to be able to touch meditation more through painting and working. I am currently working on a written piece that I have at the moment titled War Stories, and I am trying to center object as witness, and this object as witness being the table, because the table very often, as Carrie Mae Weems in her The Table series examines, is sometimes a place of reflection, of internalization, of meditation and realization, I guess, an unpacking of memory, going down a path that continues to reveal itself to you because you're walking it. My first two January reads are Chinua Achebe's Africa's Tarnished Name, as well as Ocean Vuong's On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. Both of these books, I feel, have contributed to me sitting down and recording the sort of long form freestyle analysis on my ideas of identity and how they're so linked to how the world functions and moves. So one of my friends, who actually is the founding member of a club I just joined, a community, Black Spine Crackers, and these were my two books that I said I was going to read, and it is the third week of January and I have finished them both. And I'm expected to write a review for my community about these two books, and I think one of the first things I did after reading was just take a diary and reflect. Just not think about the quote-unquote correctness of the analysis, but just to pour everything out on paper And I think these two ideas that were contrasted against each other stuck out to me. In one instance, Chinua Achebe is exploring Africa and uses a lot of personalization to describe a state or a community or a nation. And I think even when you personalize Africa and you think about it as personalize, humanize, objectify Africa maybe into something more digestible, like a tree. So in the book, for instance, Chinua Achebe refers to the Congo and symbolizes it as a tree which has borne the machete many times, and it has a lot of scars as such to this day because of it. But how, when we think about Africa as one entity, then we are able to think about every other nation as part of that moving and functioning body. And we all know that if in your body something is not right, be it a muscle, be it a bone, be it an organ, be it the blood, be it water or the lack thereof, the body will always react in a way that is abnormal. It will always deviate from the norm. It will either go into destruction, and if it's healthy enough, then it begins to build again. And I guess this is the angle that Chinua Achebe sort of takes in analyzing the relationship that we have with anything on a collective level, but referring it to it also as a unit, so we can understand better what happens when nations break down and tribes fight against each other in a period where Nigeria, for instance, was supposed to be decolonizing. And then what ended up happening was the remnants and the ruptures of the colonial British era began to show in the cracks, and the formation of the Republic of Biafra at the time. It was the storyline and the movement you begin to see is how then we arrive at what am I doing about it? What kind of movement do I want to move, the bar across on the spectrum? Do my ideas change the outcome? Perhaps not. But when I choose to dissent, as for instance, a cell in the body, and move against building instead of destroying, what happens to the rest of the balance of the system? And why is that it is so important for us to interrogate these ideas in 2026? So let me take a sippy and sit more comfortably. Whew. So on how identity influences the way that we move through the world, the way that we think, I would like to refer to this book, Ocean Vuong's On Earth Would Briefly Gorgeous. I'll start with a part that appears in part 3, where he says, on earth we're briefly gorgeous, and to be briefly gorgeous means that you are seen, even if it is briefly. And I think what happened to me when I read this line is the idea of bearing witness to the formation of one, or the self, or the other, is how we're able to prove that we're alive in a world that's constantly changing. And being seen, or to realize that you're here on earth and for a moment in time you will be seen, what that looks like on first the layer of me, but also how then those actions that happen to me influence the way that I then move in the body of the collective. Now the collective can be 3 people, can be 2, in relationships and friendships, in any dynamics, work-wise as well, can be 5 as a whole team. And all of these things that are working together are supposed to give, some sort of, like I said, normal movement in line with the body. But until you examine and become conscious of yourself, you don't really know how you're moving the cells towards destruction or towards recovery. And when Ocean Vuong is sort of in part one of the book introducing who he is and how he grew up and how he has interacted with his environment, there are a lot of questions that you have as the reader. Things such as, I wonder who his mother is, and I wonder what stories she had to tell. You know, the question of coming from another country, in this case Vietnam, and moving to a country that in and of itself has such deep structural faults that when you fall into this in-between of a place, being an immigrant, living in a country that hates you and doesn't even recognize you actually as a human being worthy of life or of grace, or at least a little bit of understanding. And Vietnam at the time, unfortunately, had been invaded by the United States troops. So it kind of feels like here I am fleeing from a country that is so war-torn that even though my mother knew that there was a tie that was being severed between us in terms of communication, in terms of me having the full identity of a Vietnamese child, I would move rather to a place where there were no bombs going off, there weren't strange things happening around me, and there was the hope of a new life, a new chance, a new beginning. And when we move into part 2 of the book now, where now we intersect and we sort of see Ocean Vuong's life against the life of his mother and grandmother, it begins to make a lot more sense. So even when you look, I think, thinking about it just off the bat, if you look at a family and you see that each one of the people in this family have a different character trait, they're not the same. One of them is loud, one of them jokes, one of them is very serious, one of them is a loner, one of them is. These are sort of the beginnings that you start to see and say, some things are related, though they are not the cause of them. So when we meet Lan, who is Little Dog's grandmother, in the book, Ocean Vuong refers to himself with the word that the loved ones that knew him and loved him called him by a nice little dog. His grandmother suffers from schizophrenia, and they have to take care of each other, you know. And this sort of shows you also the relationship between who we are and how the world around us teaches us things such as tenderness, pain, patience, understanding, and how even though we're fully aware of these things happening when they're happening, that sometimes it's only in retrospect when we look back that we're like, oh, okay, now that I'm here, I realize I was probably just scared, I was probably just afraid. And being able to name something, an identity, is, I believe, a testament to the adequacy and the inadequacy of language. And I think that's the second part that maybe we'll move into now. On naming and identity. Okay, so names are how we identify things in life. And I mean, it's no coincidence that identity and identify almost sound the same. If I was more read up on this episode, I could tell you what the Latin origin is for that word, or the Greek variation. But I'm doing freeform and freestyle, like I said, so you're just gonna have to do with what I have and be happy it's there. So the idea of a name is something that helps us to identify or separate a unit from the rest of surroundings that we have. Excuse me, it allows us to point out certain things. So for instance, the fact that I can say this is a cup means I'm identifying and helping you identify. So of course the limitation of the name is one, understanding. So if you meet somebody and they ask you, so what's your name? And you say, my name is Tandega. And they say, oh, it's so difficult, is there another variation, Tandeka? And you sort of start off on a very tough foot, and it's like, you can't say it the way that I'm saying it. It helps to take a step back and realize that they don't have the same conditioning, cultural background, and language and form variation that you do. And even our identities and the names that we give to people and things are so deeply related to our mother tongues, you know. And sometimes not even the mother tongue, as we've seen, over, I'd say, the periods from the 1960s to present day Africa. 1960s, when most African countries were gaining their independence back from colonizers. It helps you to understand where we are, even in terms of the bastardization, as Dr. Tunjiwe calls it. No, as Dr. Kainsile Chabalala Litchfield calls it, the bastardization of culture has led also to the loss of identity of individuals. So a name helps us to be able to identify something a lot better and a lot more. So for instance, I have a friend, her name is also Tandega, and so we're hanging out. Usually it will be a thing of, okay, Tandega's Tandega and Princess is the other Tandega. So you form a system with the people around you to be able to help you distinguish things better or with more accuracy than you would have prior to that experience been able to do so. So that's how names are related to the environments around us, and we give names to things based on our need or the lack thereof of them, and it becomes a little more difficult and complex, especially for humans, to describe things that are non-material. So for instance, ideas of love, ideas of hate, ideas of passion, jealousy, attraction then stop being so quantitative and easily identifiable. And this is where the room for manipulation and sort of the in-between of the coloring and the spectrum comes in. The human experience then becomes a sort of like tug of war between everything that you're learning and everything that you've known. So we believe that names are very important, especially when we name individuals, because they direct the life path that that person is on. And so words mean things, names mean things. If your name is Tembile, it believes we have believed, and things have happened. That could also mean something else in another language altogether. And hence, when I made the example of you telling someone what your name is and then butchering it or bastardizing it in a way, it sort of needs you to also understand that they have another term for the name that you've given, and that power and enunciation are so closely interlinked, because that's how we remember along the path where we are coming from. So Ocean Vuong interrogates also this idea of the stunted mother tongue. What happens when I cannot talk to you and you cannot talk to me, because we're existing in two separate, sort of setups. When I speak about the war, you remember the bombs. But when I speak about the war, I remember how unkind America has been to me, the addictions I've had to fight, and how I'm here now with all my devastation, with all my loss, with all my life. I'm here, I've made it. And in contrast, also, Chinua Achebe examines this experience of traveling white while he was in what was then at the time Rhodesia, and saying, at the time my identity as a Nigerian gave me so much power to navigate the world because I didn't experience what they did in Rhodesia, where you can't sit on the bus because there's white people in the bus, and telling people that no, I'm from Nigeria. In Nigeria, we do what we want. That sort of movement of the actualization of the self and finding power in your name and power in the name of where you come from, I think is an idea also linked to Steve Biko's Black Consciousness movement, because when you think about it, when he speaks about how the black man has become a shell of himself, and how the power is in realizing that he's not a shell of himself, he must actually become himself to be able to step into the power and the freedom that lies in the land. So the name is important. The name is how you set the trajectory for something, and I guess the name is related to the narrative, because when you form a narrative, also you're building a name. That's why people who build brands are so intentional about the words that they use. They will hire specialists to stretch the theory, to find double conundrums, to find double meanings, to pierce it for all it has to give, the feelings that come with it, the ideas, the colors, everything that makes it what it becomes is deeply researched and interrogated. Because even though we can't name certain things, we can sure come up with a way to describe it. And I think that's the intersection of the name and the identity and why it's so important. And I think when you think about this then, and you think about how independence and the fracturing of African societies post-independence, for example, your corruption, your lack of morale, the discard of human lives, the increase in crime, killing rates, the increase in gender-based violence, the natural and just sort of accepted position of a country that's, if it's just functioning right and I have enough distractions, then I'll be okay. And a generation of compartmentalization, because if you don't compartmentalize, how are you going to survive the world that you see around you? So in a world of that and the ever evolving, and where now we have the ability to name things in languages and also coin our own terms, it's a wonder that we will have so many instances of an identity crisis. And I think an identity crisis is very closely linked to an existential crisis, because you're so far tethered from the reason you're here, who gave birth to you, what's your power, your surname, your inheritances, that you search the world on foot for meaning. You take on the form of how white settlers or white travelers at the time who would discover, quote unquote, lands in Africa would be looking for meaning, in search for meaning, on voyage to see the world beyond. And with how you'd see pre-colonial setups of African societies, there was joy in the present, there was joy and contentment in the lives that the land was offering. There was enough of everything around us, and even the trees and the animals and the spirits and everything was a part of that. That is something also that Ngugi wa Thiong'o examines in The Perfect Nine. I think books are just that powerful. The fact that you're able to come up with a model and a canvas for identity, and understanding that the stretching of it and the movement of it is also dependent on how you choose to name something. If something to you is love, what does that actually even mean? If something to you is disrespect, what are the connotations of that? Is that accompanied only by diction or by tone as well? And how would you examine or interrogate the world if you had one less thing to work on? If you notice someone only when you see them, if the room was dark, what would be the alternative way of engaging such a challenge? So, uh, you know, we're here now, and I think this idea of an identity crisis and existential crises are based on that and derived from this lack of and the untethering from our communal reasons for being here. So if you think about it, the identities of clans differs from clan to clan. So for example, perhaps the Lamini clan does not pride themselves in manual labor. Perhaps they pride themselves in fashion and creating garments and ensuring that there is plenty of lovely things to look at. Perhaps the Nsibanzis are the ones that know how to build. Perhaps they find joy in laying and building things and growing. I think that purely your inheritance then lies in your strengths. So do your flaws, of course, but at the end of the day, once you realize why you're here based on the larger body, then you're able to make a more meaningful and impactful change. And now I want to explore the idea of memory. Memory in relation to, I guess, remembering or being able to form a vivid picture of yourself. So, Ta-Nehisi Coates in The Water Dancer quotes the woman known in the book as Black Moses, and further, upon inquiry and realization, we learn that this woman that's quoted in the book is actually Harriet Tubman. And so the examination happens where Harriet Tubman reminds the main character in the book, H, that, hey, to forget is to die, is to truly slave. You need to always remember. And I think remembering and remembrance is an important thread in ensuring that our names and our identities stay as closely rooted to the historical why of our existence. And a lot of people might say there's a lot of maybe politicization of the name, a lot of polarity, a lot of charge and direction in remembering the past. But we don't just remember from the point of fracture, we remember from that point and into further the back, knowing how your name has evolved over time, knowing where your ancestors came from, knowing and realizing why you are here at this specific time. Did your great-grandparents move from Central Africa towards the south to look for shelter? Did they develop a name for themselves to fit in with the environment at the time so that people wouldn't harass them or chase them away from the country? There's a lot of surviving that bloodlines have done. There's a lot of severance, a lot of movement, a lot of destabilization, that just because we see a world of quick movements, microwave food, internet, 5G, vaccinations, everything is moving so quickly, we're working online, we think that we're the generation that knows it all. But when we look around us and we look at the disintegration of communal structures, we look at the disintegration of families, and we examine our setups, looking at Lilogishi, looking at the suburbs, looking at private schools, looking at public schools, looking at calendars, interrogating opportunities, looking at state funds, understanding how things influence the way that you live life, looking at taxes, you then begin to understand that there is a need, and a very urgent one at that, for you to be as closely rooted to your identity and know what that is, because it's nations that are built on that. Because when you are a stronger unit, you become a stronger molecule or double unit. And I think at the social level, then our approximation and our standard level becomes higher. One of my friends, Maisha, we were having a conversation about group work and he said something so interesting, and he said, my friend, I don't like group work, but at the end of the day, what I've learned from group work is it represents the total average of that group and its intelligence. And perhaps that's how we discredit a meritocracy. Because when we have a meritocracy, then all the smart people are just going to do what smart people do. But we also need people who aren't so smart. We need people who are technical. We need people who are artistic. We need people who are, not to say that any of these things are mutually exclusive, but I'm just saying that a pot is made better when it has many spices, when it has many variations, vegetables, and the right amount of everything builds a society that is so strong and so unshakable and it's able to provide for itself. The human condition says we are what we are because our lives have made us. You cannot be Tandega or replicate an exact spitting image of Tandega unless, of course, I give birth to offspring. But at the end of the day, we are who we are, and really and rarely do we change. But while we're here, while we're briefly gorgeous, while we're alive, we have a responsibility to untarnish tarnished names who in their namesake don't deserve such discredit, as well as build ourselves up so we don't have a crisis of who we are and where we come from and asking everyone these questions except ourselves, but to deeply establish ourselves in a world that's ever changing with a truth and integrity and focus. So that's the tea today from Swoops herself. And you know, I'll be seeing you around a lot more. I don't know what I'll be doing, but I'll be here. And at the end of the day, the most important thing is showing up. You get what I'm saying? So, yeah. So my Substack moniker is Swoops, and I'm drinking from a squishy. So maybe the word of the day is S. The letter of the day is S. What's a word I like that goes with S? Supernatural. I'm feeling supernatural today. Have a lovely day and thank you for listening.